There it was, a dimly lit room, silence almost heavy enough to touch. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, as if marking the seconds of someone's life away. In the far corner, nestled between dusty books and forgotten memories, sat a figure still, almost serenely quiet. They thought he was sleeping, but the lights were already on. Jonah reclined in the old, tattered armchair, an inadvertent monument to the sadness surrounding him. The early evening sun filtered through the window, casting long shadows that danced across the floor. It was those shadows that highlighted the two hearts in that room that evening, his and hers. Though he wore a calm expression, it was a mask. Inside, emotions roared like crashing waves. Jonah's mind was a maelstrom of thoughts, regrets bubbling to the surface, bitter and sweet, clutching at his chest. He could feel the weight of unspoken words piling up like bricks around him. Each tick of the clock drew him further into his spiral, his fortress of solitude. Clara, standing at the doorway, peered in with a mix of concern and frustration. She couldn't decipher Jonah's silence. To her, he seemed unreachable, a ghost wandering through the halls of his mind. But in truth, he wasn't lost. He was profoundly present, feeling every pulse and timbre of his thoughts. Each breath he drew felt heavy and burdensome, like inhaling dense fog. Her voice trembled on the edge of worry. "Don't they say silence speaks volumes?" Clara wondered if her own fears whispered into the void. But Jonah didn't respond. He held himself in that chair, each muscle rigid, as if his very being was tightening against the world outside. He had constructed a universe where only he existed, invincible, vast, impenetrable. His past flickered before him like an old film reel, memories fading and brightening in a loop. He saw her laughter, bright and carefree, echoing in a sun-drenched park. Their hands clasped so tightly, it felt like they were tangled in the very fabric of love. But the laughter faded into shadows, leaving only harsh reminders of the words, the moments each an arrow shot into his heart. Clara stepped into the room, the air thickening with her presence. She moved closer, her footsteps measured, whispering her apprehension. Her heart beat like a drum, the rhythm of uncertainty. She watched Jonah for a sign, something to pull him from the depths of his thoughts, but he remained a statue, still and quiet. She took a deep breath, feeling the courage rise within her. "I miss you," she said, her voice cracking slightly under the weight of emotion. "I don't know what's happening with us, Jonah." At her words, a tear slipped down Jonah's cheek. It was a momentary crack in his armor, a silent scream trapped inside a whisper. He could hear her, but he felt so far away, surrounded by the echoes of what had once been. They say pain has a way of tethering us to our shadows, fears, doubts, regrets. His heart ached as memories crashed against him like relentless waves. He remembered the first time Clara had looked at him, not just as a friend, but as if he were the sun in her universe. The way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, how she'd toss her hair back, a gesture full of life. But then came the dark days, the nights soaked in silence, where vulnerability clawed at him, leaving him feeling naked and exposed. Clara moved closer, crouching before him as if to pierce through that fog enveloping him. Her gaze searched his face, fingers itching to touch him, to bridge that gap of distance that had only grown wider. "Jonah, please." Inside, Jonah's thoughts spiraled. He was on the edge of breaking, the dam of emotions ready to burst. What could he say? How could he explain the tumultuous sea of despair that crashed against him daily? There was no script, no right words that could transform darkness into light. "Clara," he whispered, his voice barely above a broken breath. The admission hung heavy between them, pregnant with meaning. In that moment, the room transformed. The shadows that clung to the edges seemed to recede slightly, surrendering to the presence of truth. Clara's eyes softened. "You're not alone in this." Her words wrapped around him like a lifeline. In that vulnerable exchange, they were connected, a taut string binding together their struggles, love weaving through moments of fear and uncertainty. Jonah swallowed hard, his resolve crumbling. He wanted to be brave, to confront the fears that loomed like dark clouds in his mind. But sometimes, vulnerability feels like being stranded in the deep end without a life jacket. He felt so very tired. "I feel like I'm failing," he confessed, the weight of his words laid bare. "Everything feels too heavy." The admission unfurled like petals of a flower, raw and true. Here in this shared space, he let the light in, tentative but real. Clara inched closer, pressing her forehead against his. "You're not failing, you're human. We all have moments when things become too much." The warmth of her presence seeped through the layers of Jonah's despair, igniting a tiny flicker of hope buried deep inside. But the shadows lingered, whispering cruel doubts that twisted like vines around his heart. What if this was just a fleeting moment? What if he slipped back into the darkness? Clara's gentle grip found his hand, and suddenly the world outside that little room began to fade away. "Jonah, we can face this together." Her voice held an unwavering warmth that cut through his ice-cold fears, a lighthouse in his stormy sea. He looked into her eyes, a reflection of his own turmoil. They shared this moment, the vulnerability, the honesty, the intricate web of love that stitched them together. He felt a connection so raw, so real, that it propelled him forward. In that time-stopped space, Jonah locked eyes with Clara and saw more than just concern. He saw the unwavering support of someone willing to wade through the shadows with him. Taking a deep breath, he finally articulated the words that haunted him. What if I can't change? Clara squeezed his hand tighter, anchoring him in this moment. Change doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey, Jonah. We take it one step at a time. That glimmer of hope, the seed of possibility, took root in the barren ground of his heart. He pondered the complexities of human emotion, the fight, the resilience, the profound need for connection. And in that quiet room, under the warm glow of understanding, Jonah dared to envision a future free of the suffocating darkness. The weight of his past was still there, but somehow it felt lighter. It was a reminder, not a prison. He realized that even in that suffocating silence, with the lights already on, there was a pathway to healing, a journey he didn't have to walk alone. Clara lifted her chin, her face radiating encouragement. We'll figure this out together, I promise. The tender resolve in her eyes lit a spark in him. Jonah nodded, the tiniest flicker of determination igniting deep within. He took her hand. In that simple act, he stepped from the shadows, slowly walking towards the light, a space where hope could blossom. No longer just a figure sitting quietly in a corner, Jonah managed a small yet significant smile. It felt foreign but also achingly beautiful. With Clara beside him, the world outside transformed. Moments felt possible again. Conversations began to flow like water, gentle and soothing, washing away the remnants of isolation. And as the evening sun shone brightly, illuminating the corners of their shared home, Jonah embraced the soft whispers of love and understanding that enveloped them both. They weren't just facing the night, they were stepping into the dawn, a bold testament to their journey ahead, where the lights had never truly turned off, they had merely flickered. And now they were shining brighter than ever before. The room was dark, save for the flicker of a lonely bedside lamp casting an eerie glow across the walls. In the corner, a figure lay still, seemingly lost in slumber. His chest rose and fell softly, the rhythm almost soothing. But there was something distinctly unsettling about the scene. They thought he was sleeping, but the lights were already on. In his mind, Ethan was wide awake, navigating a thundering storm of thoughts and emotions. The shadows danced around him like whispers, dragging him deeper into a labyrinth of his own making. He could hear the world outside, cars bustling down the street, laughter from nearby apartments, but inside, he was marooned on an island of isolation, longing for connection yet too paralyzed by anxiety to reach out. He remembered the last time he'd felt at peace. It was a warm summer evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky shades of orange and pink. He was with friends, laughter spilling out like music. They'd stayed up late into the night, reminiscing about old times, sharing secrets, and making promises that draped over their friendship like a cozy blanket. For a moment in that golden sunset, life felt full and vibrant, but now it felt like a distant memory, a fragile piece of glass that slipped from his hands and shattered. A soft knock on the door sliced through the silence. His mother's voice floated in, tender, concerned. "Ethan, sweetie, are you okay in there?" She didn't barge in, she didn't push, she simply asked, hoping he would respond, but Ethan only shifted slightly, his body heavy under the weight of unspoken truths. "I'm just tired," he called back, his voice barely more than a whisper. It felt easier to sink deeper into the covers than to bear the burden of explaining how he felt, a crushing emptiness gnawing at him from the inside. The moments ticked away, each second stretching into eternity. Ethan could sense his mother's lingering presence outside the door, her warm essence radiating through the thin wood, inviting him, begging him to step back into life. But he felt trapped in a cycle of despair, straddling that muddled line between what was and what could be. He wanted to scream that he was fighting a battle no one could see, but words were caught in his throat. And then, like thunder following lightning, a memory crashed through, his friend Alex's laughter, bright and buoyant, cutting through the fog. They had shared a bond forged through secrets, laughter, and experiences that felt monumental in their youth. But the weight of expectations had loomed over them like storm clouds, threatening to drench them in disappointment. Alex's voice had resonated that night, teasing yet genuine. "You're drifting away." Those simple words tangled in Ethan's mind, a reminder that he wasn't alone. But now he felt miles away, drowning in that distance. The door creaked as it swung open and his mother stepped in. There was a tremor in her voice, a mixture of worry and weariness. "Honey, I know this is hard," she began, attempting to bridge the chasm that had formed between them. "But I'm here and I need you to talk to me." "Mom, I'm fine," he replied, frustration bubbling over, a sharp edge to his words. He hated that she saw through the facade, that she could sense his struggle and still offered help. But he wasn't ready, she echoed, her brow furrowing. "This isn't just tiredness, it's more, I see you, Ethan." The sincerity in her eyes cut through him like a knife, and for a moment he considered letting her in, dismantling the high walls he'd built. But fear gripped his heart like vice, forcing him back into shadows. "I just need some space," he mumbled, allowing himself to sink down into the endless void of his own thoughts. He could feel her heart break, even if she tried to disguise it. She turned and left the room, the echo of her footsteps lingering like the fading sound of a closing door, a heartbeat he couldn't escape. As silence settled back in, Ethan felt the familiar storm escalate. He had suddenly retreated into a box that felt impossibly small, and yet this was where he felt safe, where he could keep his fears at bay. But safety always came at a cost, didn't it? He felt the chest tightness, a relentless squeeze like a vice around parts of him he couldn't name. Hours slipped by and darkness crept into the room. The storm grew. Images flashed in his mind, every moment of doubt, every comparison that echoed around him, amplifying the feeling that he was not enough. He tried to drown it out, tried to grab onto something tangible, but the waves kept crashing against him. Finally, fatigue washed over him. Unable to tether himself to the thoughts that threatened to drown him, he drifted, slipping into the fog of sleep. For a moment, he found solace in a dream. Lights shone bright, illuminating a life far removed from his reality. Friends gathered, smiles exchanged, laughter flowing freely. Yet even in his dreams, the nagging voice whispered doubts, the brightness taunting him, almost mocking. It was a cruel paradox, a beacon of what was possible and yet forever out of reach. Days turned into weeks, each one a mirror of the last. The dinner invitation that once felt warm transformed into a reminder of absence. Friends sent messages, but he didn't respond. Phone calls that rang and rang turned into echoes of his unwillingness to step out from the fog. One rainy Saturday afternoon, he found himself scrolling through social media, the glow of the screen illuminating his face in the darkened room. Each post, each photo was like a dagger, striking at an already bruised heart. Friends were hanging out, their smiles a sharp reminder of what he had let slip away. Suddenly, a notification lit up his screen, a quick text from Alex. "Hey, we miss you. Come grab a bite tonight." The invitation hung like a weight in the air. Part of him screamed to go, to reclaim that piece of himself that felt so lost. But an overwhelming wave of anxiety crashed over him, paralyzing him in place. What if they had moved on? What if he wasn't the same person they remembered? More thoughts tumbled into his mind, the comparisons, the what-ifs, and the anxious spirals deepening into despair. He typed a response, fingers trembling over the screen. Maybe another time. He hit send, and with that, the choice felt final. But what did he want? He wanted to be free of the burden, free of the chains that held him deep in despair. As if sensing his internal strife, the world began to blur again, the room closing in on him. Everything felt far away, like a distant memory he couldn't quite touch. It wasn't until the next day, still cloaked in his emotional cocoon, that he received a message from Alex again, one that sliced through his haze. "I'm coming over." Panic surged within him. He scrutinized the words, feeling the dread rise like bile in his throat. He glanced towards the door, then back to the light. His heart raced, and for a moment he wished he could disappear, fade like smoke in the air. Alex knocked, the sound deeply rhythmic, each rap pulling him closer and closer to the reality of the moment. "Ethan," there was urgency in his voice, a direct plea that felt like a lifeline. Rather than respond, Ethan inched back into the far corner of his room, heart pounding against his ribcage, a caged bird desperate for freedom. What was he going to say? That he'd been lost, that he had felt like a ghost haunting his own life. The truth felt far too heavy to carry into this moment, one burden he couldn't place on someone else. More knocks echoed against the wood, echoing like drums in a heartbeat. With that, the door swung open, and Alex stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the darkness, finally landing on Ethan. "What are you doing?" The words were blunt, but within the roughness was a sense of concern, an invitation to come out. Ethan's defenses flared up. He clenched his fists, fighting against the rush of emotions threatening to spill over. "I told you I'm fine," he replied, voice cracking as he tried to anchor himself within that familiar bubble of safety. "No, you're not," Alex said sharply. "You're hiding, I know you, man." Those words, so simple yet powerful, pierced through the fog. Ethan felt that familiar tug, the desperate longing to reach out, but fear held him tightly in its clutches. "You don't understand," he managed. "I want to understand," Alex replied, a note of vulnerability weaving through his tone. "But you have to talk to me." Those words echoed, a mantra that rocked Ethan from his core. Maybe he didn't need to shoulder this alone. Maybe standing in the light wasn't as painful as he believed. The weight of the mask he wore began crumbling layer by layer. "I don't know how to explain," he admitted, voice breaking. For the first time in what felt like ages, Ethan spoke truth, a raw honesty that ripped through the layers of pretense he'd wrapped around himself. Tears pooled in his eyes as he watched Alex nod slowly, taking it all in. "It's okay to feel like this," Alex said softly, stepping closer. "It's okay to say you're not okay. We've all had our moments, but facing it, this connection, this thread of vulnerability knitted between them, felt revolutionary." Slowly, with cautious breaths, Ethan began to peel back the layers of what had been holding him captive. The fears he had let consume him started to lose their grip, one admission at a time. The conversation flowed, and as he spoke, words spilled out like a torrent, washing away the years of bottled emotions. Each sentence loosened the grip of despair that had chained him for so long. And that's when he saw it, the light illuminating the darkness he had grown so accustomed to evading. He realized he wasn't alone in this battle. He couldn't erase every scar, but he could begin to walk the path toward healing. Little by little, he started to feel the first inkling of hope returning, a tiny shimmer breaking through the clouded haze. That night, in the safety of his friend's presence, Ethan discovered the electricity of connection. The walls he had built around himself began to crumble, and he allowed himself to breathe for the first time in ages, welcoming the lights that had always been within reach. He had thought he was sleeping, but the lights were already on, illuminating a path forward one step at a time. Through friendship, honesty, and a renewed understanding, he was waking up. The world was draped in a heavy silence, shadows creeping across the walls as dusk settled in. In the middle of a quiet room, a figure lay sprawled on the couch, seemingly lost in peaceful slumber. His chest rose and fell rhythmically, the calm surface of his face belying the storm raging inside. They thought he was sleeping. But the lights were already on. In Ethan's mind, chaos buzzed like 1,000 restless bees, each thought a sharp sting. Memories flashed, vivid and chaotic, dragging him through a complex maze of regret and longing. On the outside, people brushed by, concern painting their faces as they whispered. But they were oblivious to the fact that he was wide awake, locked in a struggle that felt both suffocating and isolating. He could hear snippets of conversations swirling around, sounds from his sister in the kitchen, laughter drifting in from the neighbors. Yet his heart beat a staccato rhythm, a reminder of the distance he felt from it all, as if he were trapped in a glass box. They didn't see the walls he'd built, the shadows that felt heavier day by day. Ethan had been a different person once, a vibrant spirit who could fill a room with laughter, whose smile mirrored the sunlight streaming through the window. Yet somewhere along the line, he crossed an invisible threshold, the light fading, leaving only echoes of what once was. Friends had noticed first, their cautious glances simmering with unasked questions. Had turned into a familiar refrain, and each time he'd offered a half-hearted smile, a denial that sliced like a paper cut. They thought he was sleeping, but he was awake in a world that felt lonely and overwhelming. He squeezed his eyes shut tighter against the memories that bombarded him. The last family gathering, laughter shared over stories, but even then he felt like a spectator, a shadow among vibrant colors. He remembered stepping outside to catch a breath and how quickly that breath had turned into a numbness that wrapped around his chest, refusing to let go. The sharp voice sliced through his reverie. His sister Sarah stepped into the room, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. "Dinner's ready." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken. He felt the warmth of her love, but also the impatience of someone struggling to reach across a widening gap. "Just a minute," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper as he turned his head away, a retreat into his fortress of solitude. Sarah paused, the weight of their shared history etched into her features. She wanted to bridge the distance, but how could she? She felt helpless, watching someone she loved slip deeper into the shadows. "Ethan, please, just talk to me for once." He squeezed the cushion tighter, wishing he could disappear, the urge to spiral back into silence swollen within him. "I can't," he murmured. The desperation in her voice softened as she took a step closer, eyes pleading. "You're not alone in this, I'm here." But those words felt like a lifeline he couldn't reach for. The truth felt far too heavy, a burden he thought was his to carry alone. With a shaky breath, Ethan catapulted himself deeper into memories like flickering lights of a childhood long past. His laughter once echoed through those walls, merging with the joy of family trips, game nights filled with playful chaos, and friends who stayed up late under a canopy of stars. But those memories felt like dreams from a distant land, a place he could no longer touch. Hours passed, marked only by the gentle ticking of the clock, and the shadows grew longer as daylight yielded to twilight. Finally, exhaustion enveloped him. He closed his eyes, hoping for reprieve, praying for escape from the relentless tide of sameness. But no escape came, and that's when it turned into a nightmare. A thick mist wrapped around him, muffling sounds and enveloping him in darkness that felt all too familiar. He was running, but couldn't escape. He heard laughter, but it was distant and foreign. Faces flashed past him, all familiar yet unreachable. In his dreams, he wandered through a myriad of poignant memories, where every voice melted into an echo that stretched beyond the walls closing in on him. He wanted to scream, to break free, but every attempt felt like shouting into the void, silent, suffocating. That night, sleep eventually claimed him in fits and starts, filled with shadows that whispered cruel truths. "You're not good enough, you're invisible." Each word felt like a stone dropped in the depths of his heart, adding to the weight he already felt. Morning light broke slowly, illuminating the room, and for a fleeting moment, he felt the warmth kissing his skin. But it didn't last long, smothered by the familiar embrace of dread. He lay there, eyes still shut, acutely aware of how the weight of it all had become a routine. A pale intimacy draped over him like a shroud. Days melted into one another, an unrelenting cycle of loneliness. Messages from friends faded into the background, and calls went unanswered. His silence took on a life of its own, pulling away everyone who reached for him. In an effort to hide, he wore the mask of nonchalance, becoming accomplished at pretending everything was fine. But deep down, he spiraled further, trapped in an echo chamber filled with self-doubt and anxiety. He felt like a phantom in his own life, standing behind glass, separated from a world that felt vibrant and alive. Anxiety clawed at him like nails on chalkboard, reminding him he didn't belong anywhere. Then one evening, while scrolling through his phone, an unexpected message flashed across the screen. It was a video call request from Alex, his best friend since childhood. Ethan hesitated, heart racing. He hadn't spoken to Alex in ages. Taking a shaky breath, he reluctantly accepted the call. Alex's face filled the screen full of life, eyes sparkling with eagerness. Ethan managed a half-hearted grunt, squeezing his eyes shut for a moment. Alex's enthusiasm was exhilarating and suffocating, like a double-edged sword. "Hey man," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Alex laughed brightly, but the humor quickly drained as he focused on Ethan's face. "Seriously, what's going on? You've been MIA for weeks." Ethan's heart pounded heavy, every instinct screamed to pull away, to hide behind the walls he had so carefully constructed. But Alex's unwavering eyes held onto him, urging him to lower that facade. "I'm fine, really," Ethan replied, a feeble attempt at normalcy. "No." Alex leaned closer, the concern in his gaze palpable. "Look, I won't let you slip away." Those words hit like thunder, shattering the glass wall he hid behind. Every instinct screamed to retreat, but instead the threads of buried emotions began unraveling. Ethan inhaled deeply, feeling the weight on his chest shift, crack, and begin to break. "I've been feeling so lost," he confessed, voice barely a whisper. "Like I'm stuck in a fog, and no matter how hard I try, I can't find my way back." The raw vulnerability of those words sent a shockwave through the silence, and for a moment the world outside faded away. Just the two of them, suspended in a vacuum of mutual understanding, where pain and hope danced in the air like flickering candle flames. "Ethan," Alex's voice softened, "it's brave to talk about it. I'm here, you don't have to go through this alone." For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope flicker in the depths of his heart, the kind that started as a tiny spark, and somehow he sensed it could grow. That night, for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to share the darkest corners of his mind. He spoke of the anxiety that clung to him, the isolation that felt eternal, and the fear of simply stepping back into the light. "You're not a burden," Alex reassured him softly. "You're my brother, and I want to help. Let's take baby steps together. How about grabbing coffee tomorrow?" The idea felt both comforting and terrifying. But in those moments spent sharing his truth, Ethan learned that the fear didn't need to be so powerful, that vulnerability was strength. The next day, under the familiar awning of their favorite coffee shop, they sat together, sunlight pouring in like a golden embrace. Each sip of coffee soothed the remnants of loneliness, and slow conversations began to weave a fragile tapestry of connection. Ethan spoke about his insecurities, the endless spiral of thoughts racing through his mind, and the sickening fear of inadequacy. "I don't even know how to start feeling better," he admitted, shaking his head. "Start by giving yourself grace," Alex said gently. "It's okay to not have all the answers." Those words felt revolutionary. For the first time in a long while, Ethan nodded, allowing the flicker of hope to expand within him. The days that followed were filled with laughter and connection, moments of vulnerability stitched together with threads of camaraderie. Ethan found himself slowly awakening, shedding layers of darkness as if emerged from a cocoon. He learned to reach out, sending texts to friends he thought he had lost. He took the leap, sharing his struggles openly, and in response he was met with an outpouring of support. Little by little, the lights flickered to life again. Each conversation became a step into sunlight, his fears losing their power as he learned to trust those around him. His therapist became a compass, guiding him toward understanding his emotions, digging through the buried pain, and unearthing resilience he never knew existed. With every breakthrough, he created ripples of light that pushed back against the darkness. In the weeks that followed, laughter returned, often in bursts, and the heavy silence gradually turned into a symphony of life. Ethan cultivated relationships he once feared he'd lost, breaking the cycle of despair that had cloaked him. As time passed, he discovered that those lights that once felt distant were always within him, waiting for the right moment to shine through. He realized he had never needed to be perfect to deserve love, and sharing his true self created bonds that were stronger than fear. Now, standing in that same living room, filled with warmth and light, he smiled at the reflection in the glass, the same face that once wore shadows, illuminated by the warmth of friendship and self-discovery. They thought he was sleeping, but the lights were always on, waiting for the moment he was ready to wake up and embrace the beauty of life once more. In a dimly lit room, the soft glow of a desk lamp flickered, casting shadows that twisted and turned like lost spirits. In the corner, a figure lay sprawled on the couch, eyes closed, seemingly knocked out by a deep slumber. Around him, life pulsed. A dog barked outside, children laughed in the street, and the faint sound of music floated up from the neighbor's backyard. They thought he was just sleeping, but the lights were already on. Inside his mind, 30-year-old Lucas was anything but asleep. He was wide awake, trapped in a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that spiraled relentlessly, crashing against the walls of his consciousness. Those thoughts felt like tidal waves pulling him under, dragging him into a darker abyss that seemed impenetrable. As the clock ticked softly on the wall, an unruly mix of anxiety, guilt, and confusion coursed through him. He could hear the world outside, happy and carefree, a stark contrast to the isolation he felt bumping against him. Lucas had become a spectator in his own life, watching from the sidelines as laughter and joy raced past him like a blur. He squeezed his eyes shut tighter, but the memories surged forward. Flashbacks of family gatherings where he'd sat quietly, only half listening as others filled the room with chatter. Friends had started to drift away, their texts filled with good intentions but lacking clarity. Each message felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters, yet he couldn't reach out to grab hold. For Lucas, acknowledging his feelings had always been tricky. It was easier to wear a mask, to laugh and say he was fine, even when he was crumbling inside. He had perfected the art of appearing okay, of playing the role of the happy-go-lucky guy everyone loved. But inside, the storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving. The voice cut through his thoughts like a knife. It was Sarah, his younger sister, her tone infused with urgency. "Dinner's ready, can you come eat with us?" He could hear her footsteps getting closer, feel the vibrations in the floor as she approached. Panic seized him. He shouted almost too loud, the words laced with a tone that surprised even him. Silence followed, thick and oppressive. Through the door, he could sense Sarah's discomfort, could feel the way she flinched at his response. "Okay, but can you come out for a minute? We just want to see you," she said softly, her voice trembling with careful concern. Lucas shifted on the couch, the weight of her words pressing down on him. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He was the older brother. He was meant to be the rock, the strong one, but here he was, crumbling apart as pressure mounted. He heard her sigh, and a moment later, her footsteps faded away. With the sound of her retreating steps, a familiar emptiness settled in. Was it truly easier to hide? Did he have the strength to let anyone in? The world outside continued, yet he felt increasingly removed from it. Heavy thoughts invaded his mind like uninvited guests. What was happening to him? Why did he feel so invisible? Each question he asked echoed back at him with unyielding cruelty, and once again he became a prisoner of his own making. As the evening turned to night, Lucas remained on the couch, tangled in his own emotions. Shadows danced across the walls like spirits whispering secrets. He closed his eyes, longing for escape, but the darkness behind his eyelids only deepened. He drifted into a restless sleep, sinking deeper into his mind, where memories morphed into nightmares. He found himself back at his high school graduation, surrounded by friends, but everyone seemed to fade away as he stood alone, rooted to the ground. Their cheers faded into mocking laughter, and suddenly he was back in the present alone and at the mercy of his own insecurities. In his dreams, he felt the weight of expectations palpably pressing down. "You're not good enough." They were the inner voices that had haunted him for too long. No matter how many people told him otherwise, a part of him believed those ugly truths. Morning finally arrived, but Lucas remained in a fog, caught between two worlds, waking and dreaming. He stared at the ceiling, contemplating whether to face the day or retreat further into the cocoon of solitude. The shadows had grown familiar, an old friend he knew he should let go of but couldn't quite escape. Days turned into weeks, each one repeating the pattern of isolation. The world carried on without him, a terrible cycle of appearing fine, of pretending he was okay. Text messages went unanswered, phone calls ignored. Eventually, he simply stopped existing in his friends' lives, comfortable in his numbness. But one day, as he scrolled through social media, something caught his eye, a group photo of his friends at the lake, smiles wide, laughter palpable. The joy radiating from the screen felt like a slap to his chest. A sudden wave of yearning washed over him, filling him with a sense of longing so profound it was suffocating. He quickly turned off his phone, the shadow of envy twisting into guilt. That evening, as twilight painted the sky with hues of blue and gold, Sarah knocked softly on his door again. "Lucas," she called hesitantly. "Can we talk?" With a heavy heart, he took a deep breath and opened the door. He braced himself for the usual concerned look he had grown used to, but as he met her gaze, something shifted in the air. There was love, yes, but there was also frustration, a muted ache that whispered of worry. She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter. He replied, his own tone far gruffer than he'd intended. She took a moment, clearly grappling with her own emotions. "I don't know how to help you if you won't talk to me. You're disappearing, Lucas." The truth in her words hit him like blunt force trauma. He had felt his heart breaking, but his sister, she saw it, felt his pain and wanted to fight for him. But how could he articulate what was happening deep inside, the turmoil that felt like an unending storm? "I'm just tired, Sarah," he sighed, once again opting for the mask. "Yeah, I get that we all feel tired sometimes," she acknowledged, her eyes unwavering. "But this is different. You don't have to pretend with me." A heavy silence filled the space between them, and Lucas felt something shift inside, a tiny flicker of hope rising against the tide. He wanted to break the walls surrounding his heart. He wanted to breathe life back into their connection. "I don't know how," he finally admitted, his voice trembling. "It feels like there's a fog in my mind and I can't find a way out." As he spoke the words, a dam broke within him. The floodgates of pent-up emotion burst open, and everything he had buried for so long surged forth, fear, despair, and guilt all clawing their way to the surface. "That's okay," Sarah whispered, reaching for his hand. "Just take it a step at a time." For the first time in ages, Lucas felt seen, heard. As he drew in a shaky breath, he realized that the lights hadn't been turned off, they had merely been obscured by his own darkness. Over the next few weeks, slowly but surely, Lucas began the difficult journey out of the shadows. Conversations with Sarah became regular check-ins, the foundation of a renewed connection. They would sit for hours, wrapped in warmth, discussing fears and dreams, sharing vulnerable pieces of their lives that had once been hidden away. Little by little, he learned to embrace the uncomfortable emotions, accepting that sorrow and laughter could coexist. He started reaching out to friends again, sending texts that once felt like insurmountable tasks. Short messages at first, little beacons of reconnection like lifebuoys thrown into uncertain waters. Lucas pushed himself to step outside, to walk through the neighborhood, to breathe air filled with possibilities. He laughed at the silly conversations playing out in nearby backyards, at children chasing each other in gleeful abandon. He discovered there was more to life when you chose to be part of it. One sunny afternoon at the local park, he met up with his friends for the first time in months. The nervous knot in his stomach twisted, but he pressed on, determined to face the world. As he approached, familiar faces lit up, illuminating the corners of his heart he had long neglected. They called, voices bursting forth like the sun peeking through clouds. The warmth was intoxicating. He felt enveloped in love and acceptance from the people he had distanced himself from. As the sunlight poured down, laughter bubbled over and a profound sense of belonging washed over him. In sharing his truths and stepping into vulnerability, he discovered the beauty of human connection, the way shared pain and joy intertwined, grounding him in a reality he longed for. He spoke openly about his struggles, how darkness had clouded his mind and in return was met with understanding. Friends shared their own stories of hardship, and suddenly the invisible barriers that had separated them vanished. With the support of those around him, Lucas began to generate light not only for himself but for others lost in their own darkness. As he shared his journey of resilience, he felt empowered, a small beacon for those who felt alone. In time, the shadows grew less threatening. The thoughts that once seemed insurmountable faded into the background, and for each small victory, he illuminated new paths. The moment of awakening wasn't instant, but a series of choices, choosing to talk, to acknowledge, to be present. He learned that it was okay to sit in discomfort sometimes, that life was an intricate dance of balance between joy and sorrow. Months later, as he stood at the threshold of his own journey, he watched the sun dip below the horizon, a breathtaking reminder of the incredible complexity of life. And as the lights turned on slowly, illuminating every corner of his being, Lucas welcomed the emotion. The laughter, the confusion, the pain, knowing it all made him human. They had thought he was sleeping, but in truth, he was discovering the light that had always been there, waiting patiently for him to wake up. A storm raged outside, rain hammering against the window like a chaotic orchestra. Inside, the lights flickered but remained strong, casting warm shadows that danced in the dimly lit room. In the corner, a figure slumped on the couch, seemingly lost in his own world. They thought he was sleeping, weary from the world's demands, but the lights were already on. In his mind, Daniel was wide awake, trapped in a battleground of thoughts and emotions. His body was still, but inside him raged a tempest of memories, regrets, and fears. He could hear the world friends laughing, a dog barking, children playing, but none of it connected to him. It all felt distant and hollow, like echoes from another life, leaving him feeling like an outsider visiting a vibrant party he didn't belong to. As the storm outside intensified, so did the turmoil within his head. Once a beacon of laughter and charisma, Daniel had been slowly fading, becoming a ghost in his own life. A few friends had tried reaching out, their texts filled with care, but each time he clung to his silence. The couch had become both his sanctuary and his prison. He closed his eyes tighter, shutting out the memories that tried to intrude. Dinners with friends, his sister's laughter, moments that were once rich with joy but now felt like shadows haunting him. The last time he had been among them, playing cards and cracking jokes over beers, felt like a calendar page ripped from the past, lost in a blizzard of time. In an effort to escape the truth swirling around him, Daniel had taken to sleeping more, though his sleep was often fitful. It was a way to escape, to hide in a land where he didn't have to confront the uncomfortable feelings bubbling beneath the surface. But deep down, he knew it was a temporary fix. Nothing could change the reality he had created, the walls he had built, or the distance he had put between himself and the world. A soft voice broke through the haze. It was his mother, her tone gentle yet firm, knocking softly on the door. "Dinner's ready, not hungry," he mumbled, even though his stomach was an empty pit echoing back at him. There was a long pause before she spoke again, a mix of concern and love in her voice. "You need to eat, honey. Just look, we're here for you." But the truth was, he couldn't go out there, not with the weight of darkness pressing on him. It felt easier to stay cocooned, away from the prying eyes of family and friends who worried about him. What could he even say? That he felt lost, that he was stuck in a never-ending fog of insecurity. The comforting silence returned, and he sank deeper into the couch, feeling the familiar heaviness settle over him. Sometimes he wished he could just dissolve into the fabric, blend into the darkness, and be forgotten. Hours ticked by, and the rain continued to pound against the window, matching the pulse of his heart, a steady reminder that life persisted outside his cocoon. The world kept moving on, leaving him behind, and with each passing moment, the walls grew taller, squeezing around him tighter. But his surroundings began to shift as a memory crept in. One cold winter night, Daniel had stood under bright holiday lights, the scent of cinnamon and pine filling the air. He had laughed with his friends, sharing stories and dances as snowflakes drifted down from the sky, laughter echoing sweetly. Then he recalled the warmth of his mother squeezing his shoulder, words of encouragement wrapped around him like a blanket. Those words had felt empowering then, igniting a fire within him. But now that fire had dimmed to a flicker, struggling to stay alive. Was it too late to rekindle it? A wave of guilt washed over him as he relived moments of joy and connection that felt like distant dreams. He couldn't bear the thought of stepping back into the light after so long in the dark. He tried to push the memories away, hoping they would fade like wisps of smoke, but they only grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, the world outside didn't seem so daunting. What if he opened the door? What if he talked to his mother? But uncertainty clawed at him, wrapping tighter than a vice. He could practically hear the voices in his head echoing, "They won't understand." The discouraging whispers circled like vultures, feeding on his insecurity and fear. Just as he began to descend back into despair, the storm outside intensified. The wind howled, rattling the window panes, and a particularly loud clap of thunder jolted him back to reality. Panic flooded through him. The very element of life, the thunderous storm felt fitting to his mental state. It was chaotic, frightening, yet somehow alive. In that moment of turmoil, reality hit him like a brick. The lights were on, he just had to choose to acknowledge them. Gripping the edge of the couch, he finally summoned the courage to get up. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. As he approached the door, each step shook loose pieces of fear clinging to him. With a hesitant hand, he turned the doorknob and opened the door, revealing the warmth of the house. His mother stood anxiously just outside, her eyes bright with concern. "Daniel," she breathed, relief flooding her expression. He could feel the weight of her love cocooning him, a stark contrast to the storm that still raged outside. "Mom, he started, the words catching in his throat. "Let's talk," she said gently, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. And in that simple act, something in him began to break free, a sliver of hope breaking through the storm clouds. He sat at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window as the storm slowly receded outside. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, but Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself against the tidal wave of feelings. "I haven't been okay," he finally confessed, his voice barely more than a whisper. His mother's expression didn't shift, it remained a blend of love and understanding. "It's okay to not be okay," she responded, her voice steady and calming. "But I need you to talk to me." Sitting across from her, under the gentle light of the kitchen, Daniel felt a sudden rush of vulnerability. The walls he had built trembled, and he began speaking first hesitantly, then releasing a torrent. He described the darkness that had invaded his mind, the loneliness he had tucked away behind layers of pretense, how the laughter had faded into silence. With each word, the weight on his chest lessened. It felt like unwrapping a tightly bound package and uncovering everything he had hidden away, all the fears, anxieties, and concerns that had kept him in that hermit-like state. As he spoke, tears pooled in his eyes, and for the first time, he allowed himself to breathe in the reality of his struggle. His mother reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "You're not alone, Daniel," she said softly. In that moment, the kindness wrapped around him felt like a lighthouse guiding him through turbulent waves. He had lived in darkness too long, convinced he had to fight battles by himself. But here, illuminated by the warmth of family love, the flickers of hope began to spark something inside him. "I want to feel better, but I don't know how," he admitted, feeling both scared and relieved. "Taking the first step is huge," his mother encouraged. "What you're feeling is real, and admitting it is brave." It felt monumental, realizing he didn't have to tackle this alone. With newfound determination, Lucas vowed to fight against the darkness that had clouded his life. That night, sitting with his mother at the kitchen table, he made a promise to himself to face the storm head-on, one step at a time. In the following days, Daniel took gradual but meaningful steps toward reclaiming his life. He started reaching out, not only to his family, but to friends he hadn't spoken to in ages. At first, it felt daunting, like approaching a mountain too tall to climb, but he soon discovered that the people who loved him were eager to listen, to help. Each text sent was a lifeline, each call connected him back to friendships that had meant the world to him. Came a response from Jamie, one of his closest friends. He began to venture out into the world, first with small outings, a coffee here, a walk in the park there. It wasn't easy, anxiety still lingered in his mind, but it felt a little less oppressive in light of the connections he was reestablishing. He felt alive again, slowly rediscovering the layers of joy hidden beneath the fear. Each time he stepped outside, something inside him began to shift, like the way the sun breaks through clouds after a storm. With each laugh shared with his friends, each conversation with his family, he regained fragments of himself he thought were lost forever. But transformation takes time. There were moments when the shadows would creep back in, reminding him of old demons, instilling doubt. And in those moments, he learned to pause, to breathe, and to reach out for support. One evening, a few weeks after he had first opened up to his mother, Daniel found himself sitting around a bonfire with friends. The air was crisp, the stars blanketed the sky, and laughter crackled like the fire before him. Jamie teased, a grin illuminating his face. More like hiding from them, Daniel joked back, relieved to feel the warmth of friendship wrapping around him. As stories flowed and laughter echoed, he felt lighter, freer. Here, around the flames, he uttered those same vulnerable truths, his battles with insecurities, his struggles to reconnect, and each word carried less weight than it had before. By the time the fire died down, Daniel felt different. The shadows still remained, but they no longer held the same power over him. He knew he could lean on his friends. He didn't have to fight this battle alone. The lights were on, brighter than ever, illuminating paths he hadn't noticed before. Embracing the struggle became part of his journey, blending pain with healing. Daniel learned that it was okay to lean on those you love, that vulnerability could spark connection rather than shame. Months rolled by, and as the seasons shifted, so did he. With each challenge faced and every moment of honesty, he felt himself rise stronger, more resilient, a phoenix drawing strength from ashes. So as he stood one evening on the porch, watching the sun set in a wash of fiery colors, he finally understood. The lights were indeed on, not just in the world around him, but within him as well. They had always been there, waiting for him to notice and realize that life was a journey filled with ups and downs, laughter and tears. In that moment, he reflected on the journey from darkness to light, a journey he no longer had to walk alone. They thought he was sleeping, but in truth, he had awoken to a life rich with connection, love, and the unwavering realization that it was okay to ask for help when the footlights dimmed. This was his story, and as he stepped forward into the future, the flickers of hope turned into a blazing fire, illuminating his path and inviting those he loved to walk alongside him. The lights were on, brighter than ever, and he was finally ready to live. There was a moment just before dawn when the world seemed to hold its breath. The sun had not yet risen, but the first glimmers of light were starting to chase the darkness away. In a small house tucked at the end of a quiet street, a figure lay on the couch, seemingly lost in a deep slumber. They thought he was sleeping, but the lights were already on. In Ryan's mind, thoughts raced like a speeding train, relentless and roaring. He lay there, body still, but inside a storm brewed. Memories swirled, fragments of laughter, faces of friends, moments of joy intermixed with painful shadows. The reality of his world felt like a dimly lit theater, where he was both the star and the audience, struggling to find the courage to step into the spotlight. The ticking of the clock echoed through the stillness, each tick a reminder of the time slipping away. He could hear the faint sounds of life outside, birds singing, cars passing, the distant sound of someone laughing. But to Ryan, those sounds felt like echoes from another universe. Out there, life was vibrant, alive. Inside, he was trapped within the stillness of his own mind. Outside of himself, everything looked fine. To the casual observer, he was merely resting, perhaps recovering from a long day or preparing for something ahead. But the truth was much darker. It had been weeks since he felt truly awake, weeks spent submerged in a fog of apathy and detachment that he struggled to articulate. He shifted ever so slightly, trying to dispel the weight pressing down on his chest. Memories flooded in Saturday nights spent with friends, laughter spilling over like beer from a shaken bottle. But soon, those memories twisted into a painful reminder of the distance he had created. The more he replayed those moments, the more he felt like a ghost haunting his own life. His sister's voice broke through the haze, a melodic call tinged with worry. He opened his eyes just a crack, letting in a sliver of light. Her silhouette stood in the doorway, a mix of concern and determination etched on her face. "Really, it's time to get up." "I'm fine," he replied, the words heavy on his tongue as if they were rehearsed lines from a script he no longer believed in. He could hear the disappointment in her sigh, the kind sound that clung to the air, thick and suffocating. "Fine, you haven't eaten anything all day. Can we at least watch a movie together?" "I miss you," she pleaded softly, her voice just above a whisper, the warmth in her tone a stark contrast to the chill that enveloped him. He wanted to scream, to admit how far he had drifted, that he was anything but fine, but the words felt trapped in his throat, the familiar barrier rising again. Instead, he turned back toward the couch, closing his eyes, hoping to melt into the darkness, wishing he could disappear entirely. The minutes crept by, each one heavier than the last, wrapping him in a blanket of isolation. Outside his room, life continued. He heard cars drive by, the laughter of children playing in the park down the street, a sound that should have brought him joy but instead felt like a distant reality, an ungraspable dream. Buried beneath the layers of confusion and doubt, Ryan's mind began to spiral. What had happened to him? A year ago, he had been full of life, making plans, dreaming big. But one by one, those dreams had dimmed, snuffed out by the weight of anxiety and depression. What was once vibrant had turned dull and uninspired, leaving him in a dark abyss he feared would swallow him whole. The echo of his sister's laughter seemed to haunt him, reminding him of the love and light he had pushed away. He remembered their childhood adventurous days filled with laughter, secrets shared in whispers, the bond that had once felt unbreakable. But lately, it felt like he was losing her too, letting the darkness consume not only himself, but the joy they had always shared. With a heavy heart, he sank further into the couch, pulling the blanket over his head like a shield. It was easier to hide than to face the reality that he was losing the very essence of who he was. And deep inside, a flicker of guilt kindled, whispering that he should reach out, that he should let her in. But the fear loomed larger than the guilt, and with each passing moment, he felt immobilized, trapped within the heavy walls he had built. As the sun began to rise, illuminating the corners of his room with soft golden light, Ryan felt an internal battle begin to brew. The warmth of the sun beckoned him, a gentle reminder that outside the walls of his mind, life continued capable of tumult and chaos, but also of beauty and connection. He thought of his best friend Jake, who had been trying to reach him for days. "Man, let's hang out," the text had read. But each time he numbed himself, burying his phone beneath a pile of clothes, avoiding the very lifelines that could pull him back into the world. Yet something stirred within him as he listened to the pitter-patter of rain on the window. What was this? A small flicker, a reminder that he didn't have to stay in this place alone. Vague memories of friendship began to fight their way back into his consciousness, vibrant moments, laughter-filled nights, camaraderie that felt like a warm hug. In that pressing silence, he began to push back against the walls of darkness. Slowly, he peeled the blanket back and swung his legs over the side of the couch. They felt heavy like lead, but the movement itself felt liberating, as if he were shedding layers of confusion and doubt. With a shaky breath, he stood. The world around him felt different somehow, filled with potential just waiting to be explored. A flicker of determination ignited, and he took a step toward the door. "You can do this," he whispered quietly to himself. With a deep breath, he turned the doorknob and stepped out into the warmth of the morning sun, letting it wash over him like a balm. His sister's eyes widened as she turned to see him standing there, vulnerable yet determined. She exclaimed, a mix of relief and joy flooding her voice. He faltered, words struggling to form. The moment felt monumental. With that small admission, he took a hesitant step forward, embracing the challenge of vulnerability. He had spent far too long hiding in the shadows, and now he had the chance to reclaim the connection he had nearly lost. He asked. Sarah stepped toward him, the warmth in her eyes a beacon of hope. "Of course, I'm here for you." Each word felt like a gift, and Ryan finally began to share the weight he had been carrying. He spoke of the overwhelming sadness he felt, how it seemed to seep into every aspect of his life, whispering lies that told him he was unworthy of love, of happiness. "Thought I could just sleep it off," he said, voice breaking as he continued. "But it's like even when I'm awake, I'm still trapped in this fog." Tears began to slip down his cheeks, and for the first time in what felt like eternity, he allowed himself to be seen, fully exposed in his vulnerability. Sarah stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him, her embrace anchoring him firmly in the moment. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, the sincerity in her voice washing over him like a gentle rain. "Taken a brave step, Ryan, and I want you to know that it's okay to feel this way." They talked for hours, sharing memories, fears, and hope, small victories of connecting and healing. Each revelation brought clarity, and Ryan realized he hadn't been alone in his struggles, he had just been hiding. In the days that followed, he took each moment as it came, weaving the fabric of his life back together. He reached out to Jake, accepting invitations to grab coffee, to walk in the park, to simply reconnect. Each time he felt the fog lift just a little more, revealing parts of himself that he had neglected. He began journaling, allowing the words to spill from his heart and onto the pages, a therapy in itself, a way to articulate the chaos that lived within him. Writing became a canvas where he painted his struggles and victories, where he could process his emotions without judgment. Then there were weekends spent with friends, laughter filling the air as they reminisced about old times. Jake brought over pizza, and they stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, the bond that had always connected them rekindled with each shared story. Ryan learned to appreciate the small steps, the little victories, like when he finally laughed freely without thinking of the weight pressing down on him. He discovered that moments of happiness could coexist with moments of pain, and that life was a kaleidoscope of experiences woven together, each piece adding depth to the whole. Gradually, the lights began to brighten, illuminating pathways he had thought were long lost. He started taking care of himself physically, mentally, and emotionally, and as he embraced this journey of healing, he also began to help others finding themselves in similar struggles. There was power in storytelling shared experiences that could unite and inspire. He volunteered at a local support group, sharing his journey with others, helping them navigate their own storms. Every story told became a lifeline, a beacon of hope for someone else drifting in darkness. Ryan began to understand that vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength. In sharing his own struggles, he touched the hearts of others, reminding them they were not alone in their battles. He created a safe space for people to explore their feelings, to be heard and seen in a world that often felt overwhelming. As weeks turned into months, Ryan embraced his new reality, the one where the darkness didn't have to hold him hostage. The lights in his heart grew stronger, illuminating paths he had once feared to tread. He learned that embracing the messiness of life created space for growth, healing, and joy. Standing on the porch one evening, he gazed out at the sunset, the sky painted in vibrant colors, a breathtaking reminder of life's beauty. In that moment, Ryan realized he was finally awake, truly awake, not just to the world around him, but to himself. They had thought he was sleeping, but all along he had been searching for the light within a light that never truly dimmed, merely hidden beneath layers of fear and uncertainty. Ryan stepped forward, ready to embrace every twist and turn on this journey called life, surrounded by the love of family and friends, and an unwavering commitment to find joy, connection, and hope no matter what the future held. The lights were on, and he was finally living. The cool morning air drifted through the open window, carrying with it the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Inside a modest apartment, silence reigned, punctuated only by the soft hum of a refrigerator. In the living room, a figure lay on the couch, limbs sprawled out like a lost puzzle piece. They thought he was sleeping, but the lights were already on. In David's mind, a chaotic universe unfolded, thoughts colliding and spiraling into an emotional abyss. He lay still, eyes closed, but the world within him roared to life, a cacophony of insecurities, memories, and unrealized dreams. Outside, life pulsed with energy. Laughter floated in from children playing, cars revved up for the day. Inside, the vibrant colors of life felt like a distant echo, fading away with each breath he took. His heart raced, caught in the relentless tide of anxiety that had wrapped around him like thick fog. It was one of those mornings where everything felt heavy. Even the very act of breathing seemed an effort, a challenge that left him feeling more exhausted than when he had closed his eyes the night before. David had been avoiding the world for weeks, retreating into this cocoon he had spun from layers of uncertainty and fear. There were moments, glimmers of hope, where he tried to reach out through the suffocating silence. But each time he did, he felt swallowed whole by the darkness creeping up his spine. He wondered if anyone would notice, if anyone truly cared. Just a week before, his best friend Mark had sent a text that read, "Hey man, everything okay?" But instead of responding, David had buried himself deeper in his fortress of solitude, staring blankly at the wall until sleep masked the void. The sound of his phone buzzing suddenly cut through the silence like a knife. David flinched at the noise, heart racing as he jolted upright from the couch. He glanced at the screen, noting it was another message from Mark. "You coming over later?" The weight of those words pressed down on him, stirring a mixture of both warmth and anxiety. Did he want to face them? The thought of stepping out into the world felt both freeing and terrifying, yet all he could manage was a half-hearted response. Maybe. As he lay back down, staring at the ceiling, a single thought began to nag at him. What if, beneath all the pain and the self-imposed isolation, there was still a flicker of hope? What if he didn't have to feel so alone in this battle? He squeezed his eyes shut tighter, willing away the uncertainty, but the flood of memories continued to rush in uninvited. He thought of his last gathering with friends, a vibrant night filled with laughter and camaraderie, the warmth of connection that felt as comforting as a favorite blanket. But then came the inevitable slide into darkness, the feeling that he didn't belong, that he was the only one in a room filled with people yet utterly alone. His mind replayed those moments like a movie stuck on repeat. While others danced and shared stories, he had sat on the outskirts, feeling invisible. Everyone had seemed so engaged, and he was just there. It was suffocating. For weeks now, he had filled his days with mindless distractions, endless reruns of television shows, video games that required no emotional investment, and scrolling through social media as if it were life support. But the glow of the screen could never replace authentic connection. Deep down, he longed to reach out, to share his struggles, but the idea of baring his soul felt more daunting than facing the fear itself. It was then that he felt a pang of guilt wash over him, guilt for shutting himself away, for worrying the people who cared about him. The thought of disappointment crept in like a thief, silently edging closer with every tick of the clock. He was tired of pretending that everything was fine, yet the burden of truth felt almost unbearable. Suddenly, the apartment door swung open. His sister Mia stepped inside, her presence brightening the room as if a window had just flung open. She called, her voice a mix of cheer and concern. Caught off guard, he turned his head slightly, blinking against the bright morning light pouring in. "Yeah, I'm here," he mumbled, feigning nonchalance, but he could see the way her face fell, concern etching deeper lines across her forehead. "Come on, I made breakfast." "You need to eat something," she urged, stepping further into the room, her eyes scanning the familiar clutter. "I'm not hungry," he replied, an automatic response that felt like a flimsy cover for his deeper struggles. "You need fuel for the day, David," she insisted gently, walking over and sitting on the edge of the couch. "Please, just come to the table for a minute." The sincerity in her voice pierced through his defenses, and he felt a mixture of gratitude and dread roll through him. He didn't want to expose the darkness that lingered within, but Mia had always been the one to pull him out of the depths. She was the antidote to his isolation, a guiding light shining through the fog. With a reluctant sigh, David pushed himself up from the couch, legs shaky. As he walked into the kitchen, the warmth of the sunlight streaming in felt different, imbued with a hint of hope. Mia already had pancakes sizzling on the stove, and the comforting aroma wrapped around him like a hug. "See," she said, flashing a bright smile that momentarily eased the tension in his chest. "Yeah, kind of," he murmured, pulling out a chair and sitting down at the table. He watched as Mia plated the pancakes, her movements carefree and reassuring. They ate in silence, the clinking of forks against plates the only sound filling the room. With every bite he took, David felt an inkling of realization that perhaps he didn't have to hide away in darkness anymore. "Listen," Mia began cautiously, breaking the silence. "You know you can talk to me, right, about anything." Her words hung heavily in the air, and he knew she was right, but the fear of judgment gutted him. "It's just, everything feels overwhelming," he finally admitted, unable to hold back any longer. "I keep thinking I'm a burden." "You're not a burden," she insisted, leaning closer, her tone warm yet firm. "We're a family. Families help each other. Just let me in, Dave." David felt the weight on his chest lift just a little but still hesitated. The shadows in his mind had darkened his perception for so long, and the thought of revealing his true struggles felt daunting. "I feel so lost," he confessed, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "Like I'm drowning in my thoughts and everyone else is moving on with their lives without me." Mia listened intently, her eyes steady and focused on him. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Just take it one step at a time. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared." His heart pounded in his chest, words tangling in his throat. "But what if I fail?" "Then you try again," she replied, her expression unwavering. In that moment, something inside David shifted. It was as if a door had cracked open just a little, letting in a sliver of light pushing back against the shadows. He took a deep breath. "I want to try." The relief on Mia's face was palpable. "That's it. Let's talk to Mark and the others. They've been worried sick about you." As they finished breakfast, David felt a newfound resolve welling up within him. Maybe he didn't have to face his fears alone. The sun was now fully risen, bathing the world outside in morning light, rejuvenating the fabric of the day. Together, they picked up their phones and began crafting messages to reach out to their circle of friends, their hearts racing at the thought of connection. "Okay," he said, fingers hovering over the screen. Mia smiled, the kind of smile that made him feel he was finally taking a step toward rediscovering life. With a deep breath, he hit send. The message soared into the digital ether, carrying with it a small piece of hope, a lifeline thrown into uncertain waters. As they waited, the atmosphere in the room shifted slowly but surely, hope creeping in like sunlight peeking through the drawn curtains. They talked about everything and nothing, filling the room with laughter, welcome distractions breaking apart the heaviness he had been carrying. Later that afternoon, as David and Mia strolled into the nearby park, the fresh air filled his lungs, invigorating him in ways he hadn't anticipated. It felt as though he were awakening from a long slumber, a soft breeze brushing past him, whispering promises of possibility. When they reached the park, they saw Mark talking to a group of friends. Laughter filled the air as they exchanged stories, the camaraderie reminiscent of the bond they had shared throughout their lives. Mark called out, spotting them as the group turned to see Ryan emerging from the shadows. "Yeah, I decided to stop hiding," David replied, his voice stronger than he expected. The moment felt electric, the connection rekindling like fire after being dimmed for far too long. As he joined the circle of friends, he felt a wash of relief. Their smiles were genuine, their laughter heartfelt, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel invisible. They shared stories, laughter like music filling their ears, but as twilight began creeping in and the sky turned a warm shade of orange, David felt the need to speak more openly. He asked, a wave of nerves bubbling up inside him. Everyone turned to him, their attention genuine and welcoming. "Of course, man," Mark said, leaning in slightly. "I just wanted to say that I've been struggling for a while now," David began, words flowing hesitantly but growing in certainty. "I've been lost in my own thoughts, and I felt like I was drowning. I didn't want to reach out because, well, I didn't want to be a burden, but I'm realizing I don't have to fight these battles alone." Silence momentarily filled the air, but it was a compassionate silence, a space taken to acknowledge what he had just shared. And then, one by one, his friends began to express their love and support. "I'm really proud of you, man," Jake said earnestly, his sincerity cutting through the tension. "We've all had our struggles, and I wish you told me sooner." The warmth from their words enveloped David like a comforting embrace, and as the sun dipped lower in the sky, a flickering flame reignited within him. Sharing his journey felt like shedding the heavy weight of darkness that had threatened to consume him. As the evening deepened, laughter flooded back to the group, and David found himself nestled in friendship once again. Yet amidst the joy, a lingering sense of fear lingered just beneath the surface, a fear that he would stumble back into the depths of despair. And then, just as they were beginning to relax, it happened. A sudden crack of thunder rolled across the sky, cutting through their laughter. Everyone turned their heads skyward, uncertainty washing over them as the first drops of rain began to fall like tears from the heavens. David's heart skipped a beat as the clouds darkened ominously overhead. "Uh-oh," Mark laughed, glancing around. But then David's world tilted, a wave of anxiety crashing against him. He thought, the specter of fear creeping back in. As the rain began to pour down, his friends scrambled to grab their things, laughter turning to shouts as they dashed for cover. Yet David stood frozen, rooted in place as the storm grew stronger, the world around him becoming a wash of confusion and noise. The darkness threatened to pull him back in, and he felt that familiar grip on his heart tighten once more. In that moment, everything began to unravel, the laughter, the warmth, the rekindled connections hanging by a thread. Would this storm push him back into that place of isolation? Would he find his way back to the light, or would he slip back into the shadows once more? With the rain drenching him, David hesitated, torn between fear and hope. And just when he thought the storm would consume him, the familiar warmth of Mia's hand grabbed his arm. "Let's go, David." As she pulled him towards safety, he felt the flick out of possibility igniting within him once more, a pulse of life battling against the darkness. But just like that, in the swirling chaos of rain and thunder, David suddenly realized that this moment would define him. Either he would retreat back to the shadows or embrace the storm head-on. The choice lingered heavily in the air as the skies darkened further, and somewhere in that moment, he knew that the real battle was just beginning.